and welcome to the Startups of London podcast. I'm your host, Ozan, and the founder of Startups of London. Today, I'm joined by Jordan, co-founder of Lixir. Welcome, Jordan. I'm very excited to have you and talk about the business.
Hi, Ozan. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So let's talk about Lixir Drinks, right? The website is lixirdrinks.co.uk. I've been snooping around and seeing some interesting stuff. So tell us all about it.
Yeah, great. So Lixir Drinks is a tonic water and mixer company. We started in 2018, myself and, well, he's an old school friend, but we were also housemates at the time when we started Lixir. My good friend Matt, we both set up the company then. And yeah, we predominantly supply tonic waters and mixers to the UK market, in particularly the hospitality sector. And we sell to some markets overseas as well.
Just for a bit of a context, I would love to understand your background and what's made you really want to go into this type of a business. Do you have some experience in hospitality? Is it something of a gap or a niche that you've experienced as a customer?
Yeah, so our backgrounds actually are quite limited. We both started the company when we were about 23 years old. Matt and I both were studying up in Newcastle, at Newcastle University. We graduated in 2015 and we both sort of went our separate ways, did a little bit of traveling. And then just coincidentally, I decided I wanted to move back up to Newcastle to, find work. And Matt was actually already living up there. So we became housemates. And again, just by chance, we both happened to pick up sales jobs in the spirits industry. So I was working in field sales for a company called Diageo, which sell brands, such as Smirnoff and Guinness and Johnny Walker.
It's one of the big ones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Matt, my business partner, he was working for a company called William Grant and Sons, which sell massive brands like Hendrick's Gin and Monkey Shoulder. And we were both doing sales roles.
Now it makes perfect sense.
Northeast. That's sort of the sort of background of the both of us. And it was around sort of 2016, 2017 when we really saw the flavored gin category really start to take off in the UK. So
Indeed.
Brands like Whitley Neal, they were coming out with a new flavored gin, almost monthly. And for us, we thought it was great. Like, particularly when we were going into bars, we were finding that a lot of our customers were, stocking a wide variety of gins. But then when we looked at the mixer space, you obviously had two or three huge brands, such as Schweppes, Fever Tree and Britvic. Yeah. But that was about all the category offered. And there was definitely at that point, it's changed quite a bit now, but certainly back then there was a limited variety of flavored tonics on the market, which for us, that didn't really make a lot of sense given that, if you look at a gin and tonic in particular, 3/4 of that drink is a mixer. The flavoring is always coming from the gin. And for us, that just didn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, that's kind of our backgrounds and I guess how we got into the world of tonic waters.
This turns out to be a very important theme that comes up again and again. And this is something I want to share for our listeners. So the dilemma is some people think about building a company straight out of the university. And in most cases, it is actually better to start gaining some job experience and then understanding a certain industry and then seeing the gaps in that industry. I think that's an amazing perspective. Imagine you and your co-founder did not have the context that you did and you started the same company. Do you think it would be different?
Yeah, definitely. I think with Lixir, when the idea came about, it was very natural and organic and it wasn't in any way forced. I think there's definitely always been something in Matt and I where we were probably at some point going to start a business. I think, my sort of father's always been sort of self-employed. So I grew up with, him. He worked for himself, but he was always kind of around growing up. He had that flexibility to pick you up from school.
Amazing.
He wasn't sort of tied into just being sat at an office all day. And I think subconsciously that probably had a big impact on me growing up. And when I started working for a big company, I think always inside thought, I'd love to do something myself. And similarly for Matt, he, had some kind of different sort of business ventures, sort of small business ventures that he started up at university. So we've definitely always had that inside of ourselves, but it wasn't with Lixir, as I say, it wasn't a forced idea. The idea came about from just chatting one evening, having a few drinks, probably about work, and just realizing that we thought there was a gap in the market there, and obviously having a huge interest in the drinks industry anyway, and we were building experience. We thought, wow, this is a really good opportunity.
Indeed. So tell us about the business model. You have identified a gap in the market, also thanks to your other full daytime jobs at that time. You have the entrepreneurial itch, and I think like it's a theme again that comes up all the time. People who had parents who were, for example, doctors or like dentists, if they decide to go into healthcare, they become amazing doctors. Or I think this is the same for sales, same for other type of industries. There's almost a certain very subliminal, subconscious conditioning that I think we go through as children when we try to start to understand what life is about. And then we observe our parents from a certain perspective, experiencing life. And I think that sticks. So we have that proclivity towards whatever that is. Not everybody, of course, does that and should do that. But when they do it, I think they have like a competitive edge towards other people. So you have the founder mentality, I think, the commercial mindset your founder does it. You've identified a gap in the market, which is amazing. And then the hard bit starts. Yeah. So where do you go from there?
Yeah. So for us, I mean, this was the first business, proper business we were looking to launch. So there's a lot of things, if I was doing it a second time round, I'd probably do differently. But I actually think for us being quite young at that point and, a little bit naive, I'd say, actually helped us because it makes you it gives you that sort of fearlessness, really.
Yeah. Do you remember any of them?
Do I remember
any of the things that you would not have done if you were more experienced?
I think just sort of it comes back to planning. Like I think we'd have started a lot sooner. From when we had the initial idea for Lixir to when we actually launched the business, that whole process took around 18 months. I think when we first had the idea, we thought we'd have product in hand in probably about 3 or 4 months, which it does take a long time to set up. But I think the thing that held us back by maybe 6 months towards the end was just kind of striving for perfection with the branding and just the business in general. And I think, so much has changed since we have actually started anyway, that in hindsight, I'd have probably just started a bit sooner. I think for us, sort of going back to, we did it at quite a good point in our lives where there was, I've always been quite, although I've started my own business, I'd actually say overall with a lot of my decisions, I'm quite risk adverse and I actually like to have a plan B. So when we started out, we did quit our sales jobs, but we took up bartending full-time evening and weekends. So we had an income stream. We had an income stream there coming in.
That's a good match. Because you do some customer research, market research in the same time. It's an amazing, I think that's like a very, very smart thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. You gain that kind of operational understanding. And as you say, you hear what consumers are asking for. You get market research there and then. And coincidentally, the cocktail bar we worked at ended up becoming our first ever customer. So there's always that added benefit as well.
I think that's one of the smartest things that I've heard the founder do is, of course, maybe you've stumbled onto it by luck, or maybe it was just like a moment of brilliance. But I think it's just such a good example of the type of an action that is needed to start a business up and running in the very first days. What could be better than, like, you need to perhaps find some financial stability while you're building the business. So you actually buy yourself some runway, which is amazing. And at the same time, you are immersing yourself in the exact environment and the context where people will make that decision to either buy your product or not. Because I think it's even important to be able to imagine that interaction, right? Who makes the choice of the tonic water? Where do they see it, right? At what moment does that happen? Is it like, does the customer have a say on it? And where would that be placed in the bar? So these very little things. So the insight there should be amazing, I'm thinking.
Yeah, even ideas you have that you don't expect will be big things actually can make quite a lot of difference. So if you look on our website, you'll see our full range. each flavor has quite a distinctive color, and it is quite, colorful and vibrant.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we did that was I won't say which brand, but the tonic brand we were stocking in the bar, which I worked at before we launched, the labels are all quite similar. And actually, if you're working, in a late night cocktail bar and it's quite dark and it's busy, you need to pick out that bottle quite quickly. And if you can't actually tell which flavor's which in the fridge without having to closely examine the label, then it does become a bit frustrating as a bartender. So
there you go. What an insight. Yeah.
Exactly. That was one of our points of difference when we'd go in and chat to customers, and we'd get on to speaking about the packaging, and they'd agree with that. They say, actually, yeah, that is operationally, that is a bit of a problem, whereas the packaging you've got here solves that.
So you've built a certain value for the bartender there, and in essence, the purchasing decision maker, which I think is quite smart. But is it the customer who sees and says, okay, I want the pink grapefruit one, or like the classic Indian? Or is it in the menu and then they pick it, and then it's the bartender who does like picking up and mixing it there? How does it work?
Yeah, so it does sometimes depend. So speaking specifically about a bar or a restaurant, which in our business, we refer to that as the on-trade, and the off-trade being kind of retail. So obviously the retail is a little bit different because consumers will have the choice. They'll look at the brands on shelf and they'll make a decision based on what they see. Whereas in the on-trade, a consumer often has limited choice because a bar might stock just one brand of mixer. It's unlike beer where you'll walk in and there could be 5 or 6 different lagers on tap, which a consumer can choose from.
And it's very visible.
Yeah, and it's very visible, exactly. So whereas for mixers, it is kind of a one in, one out sort of listing. Not all the time, but most of the time. So yeah, consumers often don't have as much of a choice as to what they're served. They have more influence, of course, on sort of choosing the spirit, which they can see on the back bar. But there is things we can do as a business to solve that. So obviously, when we gain a listing in a bar or a restaurant, we'll often try and do staff training. So we'll chat to the bartenders about the brand, about the flavors. We'll do a tasting. So then they've got the information they need to then help the consumer make a decision. And then when that's not the case, because, over COVID, table service has become a lot more popular and people, order through menus, on an app or just at the table. We then rely more on making sure that we're listed on all menus and we've got as many flavors on that menu as possible to help increase our chance of sales.
But because you've also worked in that part, so you have some experience to start with, which is, I think, a big asset for the business. What was one of the things that has surprised you while you were building the first product? So let's try to think about it in 2 segments. One of them is bringing the product to the market. So like your first 1 or 2 sales points, and let's exclude the place where you were actually working with. Like that's an amazing connection. I think it's a good place to start. But what was the next sales after that, right? Because that's kind of like a more neutral experiment, let's say, in terms of the feedback that you would get from the market, because they don't know you and most of them won't know you anyways. So until there, what were the challenges what that has kind of surprised you and your partner in terms of labeling, branding, bottling, mixing of the drinks, and then getting them into the bottles? I have no idea how that value cycle works, but what are the things that you were not expecting?
Yeah, so there's a few learnings there, specifically on the production side of things. The barriers to entry for a tonic water business are actually quite high. It's not like trying to launch a gin, which you can buy a small gin still off Amazon and you can make gin and bottle it in your garage. For making tonic water, you need a proper manufacturing plant that can pasteurize, that can carbonate, that can blend the liquids, that can bottle, that can put on the caps, put on the labels, the packaging. It's not something you can do that well on small scale. So that was something going into it that we didn't have experience in. And I think that's why there's actually few competitors in our space, but they tend to be quite big corporations. I think we're maybe sort of one of 4 or 5 kind of independent, more small scale businesses that did start out with just single founders, more small scale. So there's a lot of complications around actually just getting the product made. And also, this is something I didn't realize because, I always assumed starting out, you'd ring up a manufacturer and say, you'd ask what their minimum run sizes were, and then you'd place an order. Whereas actually it's quite hard to, be able to be given a slot to produce, because for a manufacturer they'd rather work with as few customers as possible and be producing, the same products continuously. So for them to
more complexity and more risk for them, I guess.
Yeah. So for getting a phone call from kind of, two guys in their early 20s saying we want to launch a tonic brand is quite a big leap of faith for them to actually give you the opportunity to bottle with. So I didn't sort of quite realize about the complications there. And then more starting out on the sales side of things, we were a little bit more fortunate because we'd worked in sales, that we understood the nature, in how deals are done. So for tonic waters, if it's a group of bars, they'll typically sign a contract with a brand, and they'll sign that deal for maybe 1 year or 2 years.
And most of them are chains, which makes
exactly.
Kind of
yeah. So you could walk into a bar and pitch your brand, but there's nothing you might not be able to do for 18 months because they are in a contract until then. So that makes it quite hard as well.
That's the thing. That's always what kills the motivation for so many business owners, entrepreneurs. Like with B2B businesses, there are a lot of opportunities, but with any time when you make like a B2B large scale type of a sale, it's like the life cycle of that sale is so long. It's like 6 months is a good time, 12 months, 18 months, sometimes even longer. And then that itself becomes an issue, right? You might have a product market fit. They might say, we love this and it looks great, but then you have to hold your breath for 18 months, which is like a very unpleasant experience for a first time or even a second time founder, but a small company.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, again, like looking at our market in particular, tonic waters, you don't tend to get that style in gins or rums. A bar can often add a gin to their back bar and there'll be no contract there. Whereas because it's more one in, one out with tonic waters, it's hard enough finding, customers that are interested, but then ones where there isn't any contracts in place or the contract's up for renewal. It does mean you've got to really have a clear plan on what kind of groups and customers you're targeting.
And then the difficulties and the challenges with the production process aside, tell us about your growth in terms of the sales and the sales of points that you've reached, your number of customers. What are the metrics that you follow that most frequently? I don't know, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's the metrics we look at are obviously the number of distribution points we have. So the number of bars and restaurants that are stocking our product. And then we look at the number of cases we're selling and the revenue and the profit that generates. So we try and have quite a mix of customers. We don't want to be reliant on, say one national customer and that make up 90% of the business, because if we lose that, we're in quite a bit of bother. So
huge risk.
Yeah,
a lot of businesses have gone down like that. Yeah,
exactly. And we felt that to some extent when the first lockdown happened, because up until that point, our strategy was we're going to solely focus on the on-trade, which is, the hospitality side. We're going to build in the on-trade, and then we're going to generate demand and that consumer awareness. And then at that point, we'll go into retail, because then the kind of the pull from the consumer, it will be there at that point. Whereas that, in a way, was our Achilles heel when the first lockdown came and hospitality closed, because, we saw some businesses, that lost 50, 60, 70% of revenue, whereas we literally lost about 99% of our revenue overnight when the industry shut, because we weren't in retail. We didn't really focus on like D2C or online.
Bad timing, mate.
Yeah, so that was a huge learning for us. So throughout COVID, we pivoted and we gained a lot more presence online. So we launched quite a good online store ourselves, and we got a listing on Amazon. And now at this stage, we've looked to develop the right pack formats to start entering more retail, hopefully in the years to come. But to give you just sort of a flavour of where we're at the moment, we're in the UK, we are stocked in about 400 to 450 bars. We supply all those through about a dozen different wholesalers. So it's actually sometimes hard to tell how many accounts you're listed in, because you might find a bar that sees the brand in a catalogue and they'll just order it, and you don't see that. So, but we sort of estimate it's in the region of around 450 accounts, and then we also sell into 10 export markets at the moment as well, again through wholesalers or distributors.
That's an impressive growth. So well done on that. Sometimes do you take a break and congratulate yourself and your co-founder on what you achieved?
Not really, actually.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, I think probably
I
a
knew
lot
you were
of people...
going to say that, because none of the founders that I know do that, right? So this is my reminder to you and your co-founder to like just take a moment the next time that you meet up and like celebrate and have like one of your Lixir
definitely
with like a gin, and then just look back, take a note of your learnings over the years, and then re-energize. And when people don't do it, I think it's just a huge opportunity lost, because I think we deserve that as well.
Definitely, yeah. I think like over times like Christmas and things, when you've got some time to switch off and reflect, you realize actually if you'd have said to us a year ago we'd have been selling to this customer, or we recently became the first mixer brand to become a B Corporation.
Amazing. I love B Corps.
Yeah, so we got that accreditation late last year, and obviously that was a big achievement. But it's one of those where I think when you're sort of in it day to day, you're always on to the next thing. Or unfortunately, I think the reality is that there's obviously hurdles and challenges on the way, and that takes up a lot of your time and attention as well. So you do often neglect actually sort of the small and sort of the bigger wins day to day.
Do you think how people perceive founders has changed over the last five years?
I think there's more around, especially when you look at like LinkedIn and platforms like that. There's probably a lot more kind of openness, and I see sort of people post on quite vulnerable posts now on LinkedIn, and there's conversations around sort of your mental health. So I would say it has, in a way. I think there's just sort of there's a lot more openness there around it. But what about you? Would you say that has?
Honestly, I think it has changed for the worse. I think the perception of this is not something specific to the UK, I would say, but it does mix, to use an analogy, in a certain way with the healthy dose of skepticism that is inherent in the UK culture, with the fact that with the US influence, in my experience, founders were seen more as heroes. Now they're seen more as villains, if that makes sense.
Yeah, especially there's a lot, even when you look at like Netflix programs and things, there's always, it's dramatized a lot, isn't it, as well now, the founder story, when you look at things that have happened with like WeWork and sort of Spotify and other businesses like that, you're right, the founders are often perceived as villains.
And it's kind of like what you said, a lot of people who use that title because the title itself doesn't mean anything, right? But it then creates this problem where if you're genuinely an entrepreneur trying to build business, you're like a serial founder and trying to create value, and you do it perhaps even though you earn less than your daily rate if you were to be an employee, and you're trying to create value, and you're kind of this idealistic warrior, right? In some ways. I know that's kind of perhaps a caricature, but still, I think there are people like that. Now, the conversations that those people have when they say, okay, what do you do? Like, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a founder. The reaction they get used to be more encouraging, is what I'm finding out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I try not to sort of think too much or get caught up in that. I think actually having a co-founder really helps, because it can be, quite a lonely thing being a founder. So kind of having, especially someone, like Matt, who's, one of your best mates as well, he understands it and he gets it, whereas, I could chat to family or friends, and, they definitely would offer some good advice and counsel, but they just sort of don't quite understand it. So yeah, it does massively sort of help me having a co-founder, and sort of not sort of getting too caught up in sort of the negative side of running your own business.
Yeah, we are running towards the end of our time, but I just want to finalize this conversation with quickly touching upon a topic which I find is amazingly important for the success of any business, which is the people relations, and especially the relation that you have with your co-founder. Do you have conversations around whose skill set matches better with certain parts of the business? Do you have like a division of tasks and responsibilities? And with that perspective, if you could also tell me, as a founder, what are your growth areas? What are the things that you would like to perhaps focus on in the coming years and be better at?
Yeah, for Matt and I, it's developed. You know, we've now been we're coming up for sort of 6 years of running Lixir, and it has changed over time. The good thing about having, you know, a really close old friend as your co-founder is, you know, you can be open and honest. So we'll disagree on things quite a lot, but we'll do it in a way where we can talk it through.
Healthy disagreements.
Healthy disagreements. Yeah. You know, I say, you know, we've never had a big row or fallout, but, you know, we certainly, you know, disagree on things time to time, but, you know, we just chat those through. So I'd say going back to when we first started out, yeah, there was a bit of a plan there on, okay, who's going to look after what department. I think we're best placed at selling, really. You know, when we get in front of customers or investors, you know, we tend to convert and do really well. And, you know, we know the business and the product inside out. And there's definitely that passion there. But we do have different skill sets in, you know, how we're organized, and Matt's probably a bit more of an extroverted character than I am. So typically his day-to-day at the moment is, you know, sort of dealing with more of our shareholders and some of our key customers, whereas I sort of tend to now sort of focus more on the day-to-day and kind of managing the team we have, and you know, just making sure sort of we're sort of moving forward more on a sort of a micro scale. And I'd say for sort of this year, the sort of the biggest learning for me, you know, I only was in my sort of sales roles for about a year. So, you know, I didn't really have a manager to look, or I only had one manager to really sort of look up to in that time. And now we've got a small team ourselves. I think just kind of my sort of management and leadership skills are probably something that I'd sort of continue to like to improve on in the coming year.
Jordan, this was an amazing chat. I know what I'm going to do next time I'm at the bar. I'll ask, do you have Lixir? And I'll have a gin and tonic, and I'll try as many different flavors I can. And I will think of you and your co-founder, and I wish you the best. I think this is a good success story. As long as you're happy as a co-founder, I think that's a big part of building a successful business as well. It is something we tend to overlook, right? It's not like this is not the Dragon's Den or like Shark Tank or whatever, right? It's like sometimes I think people make that mistake. Yes, the business needs to be commercially successful, but if you're having a miserable time in that 5-6 years, then why are you doing it, right? So I hope this makes you happy, this business, and your co-founder, and it makes your customers delighted as well. So good job on everything that you've done. It was a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thanks, Ozan. It's been great. Thanks for the time.